I was going to crazy parties, doing crazy things. Drugs were everywhere. I lost all control. I did things that I'm not proud of at all. When my husband and I met, I had come out of a 5-year heavy cocaine addiction. My husband really, really helped save me from rock bottom.
America's quintessential teenage sweetheart traded sovereignty for a 3-day chemical bender in the shadows of Paramount Stage 5. Maureen McCormick's identity became a corporate commodity, a meticulously designed mirage requiring the total suppression of a human soul. While network executives counted advertising dollars, the nation's favorite eldest daughter sought refuge in Hollywood's darkest corners. How does a person survive being cannibalized by a fictional persona? What occurs when the architecture of a life is built on systemic neglect? The genesis of America's most iconic domestic unit did not originate in a flash of creative brilliance, but in the sterile 4-line filler piece of a 1965 Los Angeles Times article. Producer Sherwood Schwartz encountered a cold statistical anomaly. Approximately 31% of American marriages that year involved a child or children from a previous relationship. This numerical data point served as the 0 point for a cultural hegemony that would eventually redefine the American living room. In his book, Brady, 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 the complete story of the Brady Bunch as told by the father-son team who really know, Schwartz explains that this sociological shift was the fundamental catalyst for a new kind of television, the blended family. The architecture of the Brady house was not constructed for realism, but for a specific brand of post-war optimism that functioned as a mirage for a nation grappling with the Vietnam War and internal unrest. To populate this domestic paradise, the production utilized a clinical casting process that prioritized aesthetic symmetry over human depth. Schwartz maintained a reserve of 12 children, 3 blonde girls, 3 blonde boys, 3 brunette girls, and 3 dark-haired boys, to ensure the family looked right under the relentless floodlights of Paramount TV Stage 5. Maureen McCormick, a 13-year-old natural brunette, was cast as Marcia, the eldest daughter. She was no longer just a child, she was a biological component in a larger commercial machine. This environment was the site of a profound systemic failure. While the show depicted trivial sibling rivalries, the real children were navigating an industry that viewed them as assets. For McCormick, the dissonance was immediate. During the filming of the 1969 pilot, her real-life family was falling into a state of volatile instability, with her parents' fights shattering her sense of security. The infamous Subject Was Noses episode, where Marcia is hit in the face with a football, was actually born from a real-life car accident that left McCormick injured. Rather than offering care, the writers integrated the trauma into the script, forcing the child to endure repeated physical impact for a laugh track. This intersection of real-world pain and fictional perfection established the foundational architecture of her life, a life where the smile was mandatory and the identity was a mirage. When the curtain closed on the Brady Bunch in 1974, Maureen McCormick entered a systemic vacuum. The show's cancellation wasn't just a career shift, it was a total erasure of the only identity architecture she knew. In the investigative reality of child stardom, this period marks a turning point where the statistical probability of survival begins to plummet. Data provided by the National Institutes of Health reveals a chilling trend. Former child actors are 4 times more likely to develop alcohol dependence and are significantly more prone to drug misuse compared to the temporal population. This numerical anomaly isn't a coincidence, it is a direct consequence of a fundamental identity collapse. When your entire self-concept is tethered to a fictional character, the removal of that character creates a psychological void that chemicals are perfectly designed to fill. By the age of 20, McCormick had already transitioned from the wholesome sister to an experimental soul navigating the cocaine dens of Hollywood. The 1970s, famously dubbed the Me Decade by journalist Tom Wolfe, provided the perfect cultural landscape for this descent. It was a time of radical self-expression mixed with a healthy dose of absurdity and poor taste. The investigative analyst must look at the root cause of her descent. McCormick described seeking refuge in seemingly glamorous cocaine dens as a way of running farther from herself. This chemical mirage didn't just mask internal pain, it destroyed her professional sovereignty. Industry reports and memoirs reveal that she began messing up on jobs and becoming labeled as unreliable or a flake. She hit rock bottom during the filming of the 1981 spin-off The Brady Brides, having traded her very autonomy for the substances that were consuming her. This period of self-destruction very nearly cost her her life. To understand why McCormick's psyche fractured so completely, one must look at the academic theories governing self-concept and the psychological cost of early fame. As explained by sociologist Charles Horton Cooley in his book Human Nature and the Social Order, this phenomenon is known as the looking-glass self. Cooley's theory posits that our self-image is not an internal construct, but a reflection of how we perceive others judge our social performance. For McCormick, the looking glass was a national audience of millions. She did not learn who Maureen was. She learned to internalize the evaluations of a public that demanded she be Marcia. This identity hijack is further detailed by Alice Miller in her seminal work, The Drama of the Gifted Child. Miller argues that gifted children, those hyper-attuned to their environment, often sacrifice their authenticity to meet the emotional and financial needs of their caregivers or industry. In McCormick's case, the environment was a multi-million-dollar production that required her to be perpetually cheerful, even while her real-world security was shattering. This systemic demand for a fake smile creates what Miller calls compulsive self-deception, where the individual becomes a stranger to their own feelings, eventually paying for this betrayal with depression or addiction.
The cumulative toll of this erosion is a state of profound emotional dysregulation. Research published in the Journal of Personality Assessment suggests that actors often possess a weaker self-concept because the personalities they display publicly are incorporated into their identity. McCormick was living in survival mode, hyper-attuned to public perception, but possessing no internal blueprint for joy. Her development had been arrested by the demands of stardom, leaving her ill-equipped to manage the impulses of adulthood. She was, as Miller describes, a celebrated star who was profoundly lonely because her environment responded with admiration rather than understanding.
The deepest layer of the Brady narrative reveals a staggering paradox. The perfect family was actually a site of aggressive capitalist extraction. This topic connects directly to the larger power structures of the era, where the commodification of innocence became a multi-million-dollar strategy. While the scripts depicted wholesome sibling dynamics, the children were demographic representations of age and gender meticulously codified for brand expansion. This culminated in the formation of the Brady Kids pop rock group, a commercial machine patterned after the Archies to sell records and lunchboxes. The irony lies in the physical and emotional cost of maintaining this corporate symmetry. The production's demand for a specific aesthetic led to systemic physical tolls under the guise of brand maintenance. Susan Olsen, cast as Cindy, had her naturally blonde hair bleached so frequently to achieve a towhead look that her hair eventually fell out in clumps during the second season. The architecture of the plywood cage extended to their social lives. The cast members, functioning under the label of a work family, were secretly dating and making out in trailers, a desperate attempt to reclaim normal adolescent development within a highly controlled environment.
This commodification of the self is the darkest side of the child stardom anomaly. The industry realized that the wholesome image was a gold mine, and any deviation was a threat to the bottom line. Consequently, the children were trapped in a state of stereotypical containment, hyper-conforming to on-screen archetypes even as they navigated internal trauma. McCormick was a product used to sell a lifestyle, her labor funded, but her spirit could not inhabit, leaving her with what psychologists call a hollow version of success.
As the 1970s progressed, the me decade became the fundamental landscape for McCormick's most dangerous years. The cultural shift toward atomized individualism, famously dubbed by journalist Tom Wolfe as the Third Great Awakening, prioritized self-fulfillment over communal good. Wolfe identified a phenomenon he termed the alchemical dream, the belief that one could transmute their very personality, remaking, remodeling, and polishing the self into something new and actualized. For McCormick, who had spent her childhood being someone else, cocaine was the chemical fulfillment of this alchemical promise. The investigative reality reveals that the cocaine dens of Hollywood were not merely sites of recreation. They were perceived as growth centers where the experimental soul could unveil a true and real self. By age 20, McCormick had developed an all-encompassing addiction to cocaine, seeking answers in the chemical haze, while simultaneously running farther from herself. She described these spaces as seemingly glamorous, yet they were the sites of her total professional and personal erosion. In this chemical mirage, the boundaries between reality and performance dissolved into a state of permanent survival mode.
The tragedy of this period is a manifestation of Wolfe's observation. When a person has enough money to take it and run, they often run straight into a mosaic of little me's reflecting in a spinning disco ball. McCormick would stay up for days on 3-day benders, doing every last flake of coke to maintain the artificial equanimity the decade demanded. This was the era of the alchemical dream gone sour, where the search for a new identity resulted in the complete destruction of the original self.
In the cold hierarchy of Hollywood, power was measured in reliability, a commodity McCormick was rapidly depleting. The most visceral anomaly of her professional collapse occurred in a casting room for what would become one of the most successful film franchises in history. In 1981, McCormick walked into an audition for Steven Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark in a state of total biological disintegration. She arrived having been awake for 3 consecutive days on a cocaine bender. To the industry's elite, she wasn't just an actress failing a scene, she was a corporate liability flubbing an audition that could have redefined her career. The investigative reality reveals that the industry's rejection was swift and punitive. One producer, witnessing her disorientation, issued a chilling ultimatum, threatening that she would never work as an actress again. This was the high price of her transformation into a Hollywood flake, a derogatory label that signaled the total erosion of her professional sovereignty. Her career entered a terminal nosedive. She began messing up on jobs, showing up high to high-stakes meetings, and destroying the very marketability that had once made her a household name. The paradox of this nosedive lies in the stereotypical containment that acted as a secondary cage. While McCormick desperately sought to shed the Marcia Brady image, auditioning for gritty roles like the heroin dealer in Midnight Express, directors were unable to see past the blonde curls of 1969. She was trapped between a past she couldn't escape and a present she was too chemically impaired to conquer. This professional atrophy led to her darkest layers. In her early 20s, she admitted to sometimes trading sex for drugs, a shocking deviation from the wholesome icon the public still idolized. The architecture of McCormick's reclamation did not originate in a clinical facility, but through a quiet interpersonal catalyst. While filming the 1981 spin-off, The Brady Brides, she encountered actor Jerry Hauser, who played her on-screen husband. Recognizing the visible fracture in her well-being, Hauser invited her to a church concert, where the environment was defined by spiritual stability rather than chemical excess. It was here that she met Michael Cummings, a man whose primary anomaly was his total ignorance of the Marcia Brady mirage. Meeting someone with no preconceived ideas was a fundamental shock to her systemic self-deception. However, the descent into addiction is rarely halted by a single meeting. Early in their relationship, McCormick suffered a relapse, returning to the chemical haze. It was at this precise moment that Cummings delivered what she would later describe as the coldest shower you could ever take. He offered a singular, non-negotiable ultimatum. If you ever do this drug again, I'm gone, I'm leaving. This wasn't a corporate threat, it was a sovereign human demand that forced her to confront the reality of her choices. The paradox of the ultimatum lies in its power to restore sovereignty by threatening the loss of the other. McCormick realized she was on the precipice of losing the only genuine connection she had ever found. She chose reality over the mirage. To sustain this, she threw the phone book out, severing ties with every user and dealer in her past life, effectively dismantling the toxic architecture of her 20s. In 1985, they married, marking the beginning of over 40 years of sobriety. This was the hard-won construction of a new personal architecture, built on the miracle of the brain and life back intact. The reclamation of a stolen identity requires more than the cessation of chemical dependency. It demands the total design of a new personal architecture. For Maureen McCormick, this was not a sudden pivot, but a decades-long alchemical transformation. By 1985, the high-profile flake had been replaced by a woman who chose reality over the mirage, marrying Michael Cummings. This anonymity, being loved for who she was rather than what she represented, was the foundational stone of her new self. Rebuilding the self meant confronting the somatic wreckage left behind by years of role confusion and childhood performance. In 1995, she sought an outlet for her authentic voice through the country music album When You Get a Little Lonely, an apt descriptor for the isolation experienced by those idolized but never understood. However, the most visible turning point occurred in 2007 on the reality series Celebrity Fit Club. While the surface-level subject was weight loss, the subplot was the exorcism of the Marcia image. By winning, McCormick publicly forged the connection between her somatic weight gain and her clinical depression, finally naming the un-Brady problems she had hidden for decades. The final architecture of her sovereignty was codified in her 2008 memoir, Here's the Story: Surviving Marcia Brady and Finding My True Voice. This was not just a tell-all, it was a radical reclaiming of the narrative. Debuting at number 4 on the New York Times bestseller list, the book allowed McCormick to dismantle the plywood cage in her own words. Now, with over 40 years of sobriety, she has reached a point of equanimity and acceptance regarding her past. She no longer lives in the shadow of a younger version of herself. She has transitioned from a commodity being consumed to a human being who is finally seen. The narrative of Maureen McCormick is not merely a chronicle of Hollywood excess, it is a fundamental critique of a society that demands the squeaky clean at any cost. For 5 seasons, we consumed the mirage of the perfect eldest daughter, while the human being behind the screen was experiencing a slow, systemic erosion of identity. Laboring within a work family that prioritized brand symmetry over her actual developmental milestones, McCormick became a biological component of a corporate machine designed to sell an unattainable domesticity. The hegemony of the wholesome served as a mask for an industry-wide neglect that prized the commodification of innocence over the protection of a child. The paradox lies in the fact that to become Maureen, she had to dismantle the Marcia that the world idolized. She had to navigate the me decade and its chemical traps, survive the professional nosedives of a reputation labeled as unreliable, and ultimately accept an ultimatum that forced her to choose the coldest shower of reality over the warm glow of an alchemical lie. Her journey from the seemingly glamorous cocaine dens above Hollywood to the hard-won clarity of 40 years of sobriety is an anomaly in the Hollywood casualty list. It is a testament to the resilience of a spirit that refused to remain a demographic representation of age and gender.
Today, McCormick stands as a survivor who lived to tell the whole story in her own voice. Her reclamation proves that while the industry may script, shoot, and sell a childhood, it cannot ultimately consume the sovereignty of the person who lived it. But as we look back at those iconic portraits in the grid, we are forced to confront a chilling residue. We must ask ourselves, what are we truly watching when we witness a child star's curated smile? Are we seeing joy, or are we witnessing a sacrifice of authenticity to satisfy our collective fetish for a pristine innocence that was always verging on fantasy? The haunting reality is that Maureen McCormick was seen by millions, yet understood by no one. If the perfect family was a product of network boardrooms and Cold War-era statistics, what other domestic mirages are we currently funding with our silence?